Well, ladies and gentlemen, today we have some absolutely massive news coming out of Canada. You see, it would seem as if Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has just been caught in a massive lie. You see, just weeks ago, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney campaigned on standing up to President Trump's tariffs, but he secretly repealed nearly all of his retaliatory tariffs against the United States on April 16th of 2025, 2 weeks before Canada's election. This is an absolutely catastrophic betrayal of everyone that voted for him. In truth, lying to Canadians about maintaining strong reciprocal tariffs against President Trump after already repealing them is perhaps the most despicable political stunt ever pulled off. Carney's deception is an absolute slap in the face to every single Canadian that voted for him. And so really, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's betrayal of his very own constituents reminds us of why we should never trust a radically progressive globalist. They lack principled convictions, doing whatever it takes to cling to power, even if it means flat out lying to their own people. Now, conservative Canadians already despised Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney for his radically progressive globalist agenda, but now, progressive Canadians are enraged too, furious over the lie that Carney told about standing firm against President Trump's tariffs. As many of you know, Mark Carney swore on the campaign trail to fight President Trump's tariffs. Really, this is what got him elected. But in reality, he repealed almost every single tariff on U.S. goods 2 weeks before Election Day. This is an absolutely shameless betrayal of every single person that voted for him. So folks, now that we know that Mark Carney actually dropped all of his tariffs on American products and completely capitulated to President Trump before he had even won the election, I think you'll all agree that this clip makes a lot more sense. So ladies and gentlemen, take a look at this, then we're going to have a lot to talk about.
I had the pleasure of getting to be at the meeting today between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada. What I witnessed was like watching a grandmaster in chess perform. President Trump has opened up a completely new relationship with Canada because of his strength and because of his diplomacy. The Prime Minister of Canada talked about finally contributing their fair share to our nation's defense, or to NATO's defense. Finally contributing and meeting that minimum 2% benchmark and climbing up from there, so they're not a free rider with the United States anymore. He talked about achieving fair trade with the United States and acknowledged, the Prime Minister of Canada acknowledged the need to strike a fair trade deal with the United States, as President Trump has long asked for. He emphasized, the Prime Minister of Canada, his deployment of troops and guards to the Canadian border at President Trump's request to keep fentanyl out of the United States of America. It's just one concrete win after another because of President Trump's leadership on this issue. And President Trump kept emphasizing two words. We want friendship with Canada, but we also insist upon and demand fairness from Canada. And President Trump will continue to hold fast to that requirement.
So folks, now we can sort of piece all of this together. The reason why President Trump has said that Mark Carney isn't that difficult to work with, and the reason why he feels confident making deals with Canada going forward is because, despite talking a big game and acting tough on the campaign trail, in truth, Mark Carney had completely surrendered to President Trump before the election had even concluded. And so like I said, folks, right now, Canadians are pissed. Now, folks, we have a lot more to talk about here, but before we do, I want to say real quick that if you guys enjoy the daily news updates, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. But okay, check this out. Prior to this bombshell news regarding Mark Carney's lies about how he was going to handle Canada's reciprocal tariffs on American products, 3 out of every 10 Albertans already wanted to secede from Canada. And so now that Mark Carney's lies have been exposed, that number is only going up. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a massive problem for Carney's regime because Alberta is perhaps Canada's most important province. Alberta is pretty much Canada's economic powerhouse, producing over 90% of the nation's energy, keeping the lights on for the entire country. Yet Canada's progressive leadership, led by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, is actively sabotaging Alberta's vital energy sector. And not only does Alberta power almost all of Canada, but it also boasts the highest GDP amongst all of Canada's provinces at $334 billion per year. But despite this, Mark Carney's progressive anti energy policies are currently undermining Alberta's economic dominance, further enraging Canadian conservatives. And so, right now, polls showing 30 to 35% support for Alberta's secession, fueled by the recent 2025 Liberal victory, confirm that Albertans are waking up to the reality that Canada's Liberal leadership prioritizes the radically progressive globalist agenda over genuine Canadian interests. And so, conservative Canadians are furious that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has revealed himself to be a radically progressive globalist, while progressive Canadians are livid that he lied for months about his anti Trump tariffs, betraying their trust. So now, Mark Carney's anti Canadian behavior has sparked a serious movement, especially in Alberta, where citizens are now seriously pushing to secede from Canada altogether, fed up with Mark Carney's lies and sabotage. And also, keep in mind, just a couple months ago, Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith actually flew down to Florida, went to Mar-a-Lago to meet privately with President Trump, hinting at big things brewing behind the scenes. So, folks, here's the reality. Right now, Canada is pretty much in disarray. Conservative Canadians are livid. There's a growing secessionist movement with many Albertans wanting to leave the country altogether. And now, progressive Canadians are enraged as well because the guy that they just elected to stand up to President Trump folded faster than a lawn chair and then lied about it. I'll tell you what, folks, what we're witnessing is the Trump effect. President Trump's presence back in the White House has pretty much sent shockwaves across the entire globe, and as you can see, many foreign leaders, namely the radically progressive globalist ones, just have absolutely no idea how to handle it. President Trump has pretty much just been dictating new terms to all of these foreign leaders, and really, there's nothing they can do about it. But you know what? This is exactly why we voted for Trump. Changes had to be made, and President Trump is most certainly making changes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap up, I do want to say real quick that we officially have a Morse News Twitter page as well as a Morse News Facebook page. So if you use either of those platforms, please go down below and drop a follow in order to get breaking news updates that relate to everything we talk about here in the YouTube videos. But everyone, that is going to be a wrap for today's video, so please go down below and drop a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this. Please like the video while you're down there, and like I said earlier, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. Thank you all very much for tuning in today, and of course, as always, stay safe.